Hey everyone. In this video, I'm going to walk you through how I use BookMap to identify entries and exits in my trades, and how I utilize tools like Liquidity Tracker Free, Liquidity Marker, and the Trader Map Lite, which is the free version of the Trader Map Pro. We'll focus on understanding liquidity zones and using that information to make more precise trading decisions. So we'll jump in. So first we'll talk about the liquidity zones in the BookMap. The BookMap displays liquidity as a heat map, as you can see. And so where the bright zones, they indicate the large clusters of buy and sell orders. They're a lot of times they're often areas of significant support or resistance, right? This is where liquidity sits and where orders have packed up and maybe have not been swallowed up yet. And so those are interesting areas. How you trade them is obviously up to you. The darker zones show less liquidity. So as it gets darker, it's obviously kind of like open water or open ocean. So you can think of it that way. It's where the price is more likely to kind of just move around freely without being magnetized by some of the liquidity zones in the darker areas. When I'm trading, I pay close attention to how the price interacts with these zones. So if a bright liquidity zone acts as a magnet pulling price towards it, it's a sign of some potential absorption or reversal, because as you just saw here, we have a little bounce off of some of that liquidity. You'll see that a lot on charts too, where if you have anything that sort of recognizes liquidity and prints that onto a chart, if you're a chartist that pulls that information in, you'll be able to kind of see where price bounces, especially for scalpers who are really looking to be as precise as possible and not waste money on too many entries and exits. So if a price slices through the liquidity zone though, it often signals that momentum is in that direction, and man, it'll go quick. And I think you've probably experienced this before if you're a scalper, where if you see a liquidity zone sort of zapped out or completely swallowed up, it will absolutely go fast. And so those are fun when you're in that direction, but not so fun when you're not. So it's nice to be able to see what's going on in terms of where people are adding the liquidity. And here you'll also see some of the numbers tracked too. There's tracking here where there's some numbers, and I'll explain those in a minute. But the tool that I use mostly, they're kind of like, I think it's like a stacked tool. I'll show you sort of the settings and where they are. They're under add-ons, and so for what I'm talking about right now in terms of the liquidity tracking, you have the liquidity tracker free, and then the liquidity marker. And so the liquidity tracker free, obviously free, it comes from BookMap, and I think it's their tool. I don't think it's a third-party tool, but it is theirs. And there's a pro version too. I used to use that. I don't have that installed on this system. I don't tend to need it. It's just extra information, and I would leave that to you. And maybe I'll do a future video on that if I decide to install it here. I try to keep things simple with BookMap. It's not my 100% primary go-to place for information. It's just an area where we can see order flow very clearly. And I think it's probably, in my opinion, the best order flow tool available that I've ever seen. If anybody's seen something different, please share. But then there's a liquidity marker as well, which I'll explain that in a minute. So I just wanted to show you where that was, and those are in the settings, again, in the add-ons area. And there are tons and tons of add-ons for BookMap that obviously we wouldn't go into today. Just showing you my simple way of using it every day when I come to the charts. So the liquidity tracker free that I mentioned, that highlights the levels of liquidity in the market. I use it to see where the biggest players are playing placing their orders. For example, if I notice like a cluster of bids below a certain price, it might indicate a strong support level. And that's where that in this case, we have the 149. This could be support, right? We already saw sort of like where it tapped into here and started to get very bearish looking. We got a lot of volume to the downside, and then all of a sudden just bounces right out. This could normally get somebody very excited and start, maybe even placing an order and getting in, and then get zapped right out. And it just kept going for a little bit here against us for a minute. Now, depending on how long you're in the trade, or, depending on how long you're planning to be in the trade, I should say, it might be fine for you, and you might still see this direction as bearish. And it may be, especially when we see some orders down here. These orders are pretty indicative of needing to be swallowed up, we like to say sometimes. But I don't like to assume anything. When you look at the BookMap, as a new trader especially, never assume anything and learn everything you possibly can about a tool, so the tool doesn't trick you into trades you didn't mean to get into, and tell yourself, hey, I thought this was going to work. So every one of us gets caught into that from time to time. But again, we use it for information, and we go from there. We try to make some general assumptions about what we see in sometimes milliseconds. And I think this tool sort of helps us do that, since we're seeing live order flow. So so that cluster of bids that are down there, like I said, going back to that, it could indicate a strong support level. And then liquidity marker marks the historical liquidity zones, and that's what you're seeing here, is all these marks here, all the zones historically that it stays. They work hand in hand. It's almost like the same indicator to me. That's why I used to think it was. I had them both installed years ago, and I just forgot that they were two different indicators. They layer onto each other, and they match where they are. Okay, they sort of match, like the numbers show where the liquidity zone prints as well, if that makes sense. So I use it to identify where prices previously reacted, and that's important too. Again, like we said, we can go back here and say, hey, look at that, it just bounced out of there. We just did that, and I kind of didn't look at my little script here and forgot that's literally what we just said, is we look at historicals all the time. It's all we have to look at until it prints. So anyway, those zones are critical because they become relevant again in the future. Again, so we're seeing price right now in this video potentially come down to this little area here. We're seeing some sell orders kind of start to trickle in. And that trickling effect is sort of like sometimes a little deceiving. Looks like it's low volume, but don't be deceived. That trickling effect can be where orders are starting to pile, or the people are testing or maybe probing the market to get in. And you'll see a lot of buy orders come in, like right now, and you may just see this just sell right down into that zone again, which is where I was kind of trying to lead up into. And this is live for me, not for you, of course. This is not a recorded session. So right now we might be able to see a nice example of this soaking up a liquidity zone. And then this is where I would try to have been in a sell when it turned green. It doesn't always work. It may go against you for a minute. It may go on against, hit a stop. But I would have liked this trade if I was going to take it, and just waited for this particular bubble right here that's on now to stay red or to start trickling down. And if it finishes the move, great. It will probably go down into that 58, 59 area. But now that we're seeing a larger bubble come in, I may have either dumped the trade or just wait for it to hit a stop loss. I'm not really sure, what's going to happen. No one is, but you never know. So depending on what your as a trader, depending on what your appetite is for going in and out of trades and hitting stop losses, moving stop losses to profitability, that's up to you. But what we want to see here is we want to see if they're going to finish the auction. And that's kind of the ongoing thing with the market in general. And this is a great way to look at it. So the TraderMap Lite add-on is this overlays some additional data like real-time order flow and market depth. That's what we're looking at now. So when you use the TraderMap Lite, it opens a separate tab. So normally what you would see is this: you're getting your liquidity zones. You're getting you could see them printed here. They just don't look quite as clear and precise as when you use the TraderMap Lite alongside of it. Now, I do flip back and forth between it. So when you move this, as you can see here, as a side note, you can change the way this is viewed based on how you want to see price movement and the fluctuations between the liquidity being soaked up and put back on the map. So they're having a little hard time getting down here. You see the little bounce there. It's a little support zone. This would be to me a little bit of a too close for comfort sort of thing. And now we're bouncing right out of it. And so once they soak it up, buyers come in, they're like, we'll take it. And then it goes up. And so these are just areas of support right now. And that's all they are until they aren't. And so it's nice to be able to see that, especially if you're looking at other things, which we all are. Like, I'm not using BookMap only. I have TradingView, a really nice layout on that for all of my stuff. And of course, we're using sierracharts for all of Simon's work, which is incredible. Simon's work for me helps me to make longer term swing decisions on trades, and sometimes even stay in good scalps for like 30 minutes. They go out of, they're no longer scalps anymore. They're actual proper day trades. And those are just big. They just help my trades be a bit more winning, or they'll show me where I need to get out of a trade if I've been in one for a little too long. If I'm trying to hang on to something and there just isn't any more in it. So that's where Simon's stuff helps me a lot in terms of the SAL indicator, everything that he teaches us. So those are the three things. So the liquidity tracker free, liquidity marker, and the trader map light are the primary things that I use in terms of the indicators on here. Now, just to go sort of like just the entries and exits, which is really what this is about, to be honest. It's really, the entries for me are about if the price approaches, like if the price approaches, say, one of those support zones with a lot of liquidity, and I see buyers stepping in, and that's confirmed by the order flow on the heat map, right? And sort of like where it's brighter, then I look for a long entry. For a short entry, I watch for the price to reach the resistance zone where sellers are dominating, liquidity and liquidity absorbs the price. So if that liquidity absorbs the price, in other words, stays printed and price doesn't move through it, that goes for either direction. I'm gonna probably take a trade. So right here, this could be a possible long, but the market isn't responding well. And so I would be like, okay, the market's not responding. We're sideways. Let's look at the SAL indicator. Let's relook at some of the things that we've been kind of using to make the longer term trades. Looks now like we're soaking up some of that top level liquidity. So, the nice thing about this being the way that it looks, it's that it trickles around and moves around sort of in your sort of outside of your line of sight, is you're always kind of peeking at it. So for me, I have several screens like most of you, and my screen is up high, but in my zone of sort of sight. So I can see the trickling. I can almost see this turning red without looking straight at it. So it's kind of just a little bit of a thing that I use it, one of the ways that I use it. And so now this is going to move quickly if it soaks up this zone where it's numbered pretty high and then maybe magnetized to that 208 that's just printed. And so but I hope that you could see how quickly price moved through that zone. And that's sort of what I'm kind of being talkative about here, because I'm trying to waste a little time. I hope it's still useful. But I was hoping that it would go through that, and it did. So I wanted you to be able to see how quickly it moves through it. And you can hit YouTube up. There's some wonderful YouTube videos about this. There are also live versions of this. Some people are streaming this live data, and it says live as it gets to you. So if you're outside the States and have a half decent internet connection, it may or may not be as live as you need it to be. But a lot of people use it that way. They don't purchase it, and they'll use it that way. And I wouldn't recommend that, not because of the, it's kind of shady to do that, I think, but mostly because I think it's really good to have the software. It's not super expensive, especially for a lifetime, and it is very useful if you want to see order flow. I don't know that there's a better order flow software out there, so I would definitely get it. And then you can get the add-ons that you want, and you're not bogged down by what the YouTubers are using for their live stream. There's too much information on those, in my opinion. But a lot of people like it, I guess. They have a lot of views. I just wouldn't. They just don't really recommend it as a trading tool. So that's basically how I use BookMap. Maybe some observations. So liquidity acts as a roadmap. Essentially, it shows you where the big players are, and as I mentioned before, and where price is likely to react. And I think that's important in terms of getting entries and exits. Pay attention to the absorption, right? As we said before, you want to pay attention to when that happens. Look for the large order, when the large orders hold the price at a particular zone, and that often signals to look for a reversal depending on which direction it's going. And then thin liquidity, where areas where there's little resistance and the price might just move real quickly through it. Now, as we just saw, there was some, it tapped many times here. And that's not thin resistance. It's thin when it goes through, right? So again, I don't know that I'd use the term thin resistance. I think thin would be somewhere where you're seeing it printed here a little less red, right? So you can see right away when something's really red that we're printing numbers now, right? We're printing an actual number because it's got some sort of order flow information coming in from that. But once we did that, we soaked it up. It looked like, they might want to bring this up a little bit. That might be just basically buyers or sellers taking profit off of that nice little move there. And then that starts to move the market up. It could be anything, but at the end of the day, we're not looking necessarily yet for this to go down to the 215 liquidity zone here at 58.52 and 58.51 respectively. But we do see that there's a little volume, a little bit of a bump in orders here sticking out, and that also represents here. So, the nice thing here is we have, I think by default, they give you the current order book and the session range volume profile. That's this here. All of you who follow Simon know what the volume profile is. And so, in essence, we're looking at, things that we're familiar with in here. And I think the order flow here is a little bit more accurate than on some of the DOMs that some of you might use, at least the ones that I've used. I don't even use a DOM to trade anymore. I use a few accounts, and in my my prop trading account, those really, in my opinion, very crappy order systems, I just turn the DOM off. It doesn't, it's distracting, and I don't need to look at that much order flow. One tool to tell me what I'm working on. And of course, you can open these up in different windows and whatnot, but I tend to use it in one. We'll look at the NASDAQ here, similar look, but not exactly the same. And this prints partially differently because it acts differently. And I kind of like that about this. This is kind of a side note, just as an addition. I like the way that this, that it looks differently, partly because when I'm looking at it, I'm looking at different things. This actually, so that's what it looks like when it's squeezed, by the way. And then when you pull it out and look at it, you can see that it's different than the ES. No matter how you try to pull this apart, it's going to be different. Another video in the future. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to give you a general idea of what I use BookMap for. We have the green volume, the red volume, and which is signals obviously bullish or bearish, or buyers and sellers, and the liquidity zones. That's pretty much it. I hope it was helpful, and yeah, look forward to doing a few more of these videos for you.